The first time Karen stormed into my life, the old wooden walls of my grandfather's ranch shook like they were still alive. It was so early that the sun had barely rolled over the horizon, streaking the pasture with a thin orange glow. I had just poured coffee into one of Grandpa's chipped mugs, the steam curling against the window as I thought about another quiet day on the land. Then, like a gunshot, the pounding started. Heavy, fast, deliberate. The kind of knock that makes your chest tighten before you even reach the door. It came again, sharper this time, rattling the hinges, demanding attention. My hand froze on the handle, and for a second, I thought maybe the sheriff had come with news I wasn't ready for. When I finally opened the door, the sight hit me like a slap. A woman stood there, stiff as a fence post, blonde hair sprayed so tight it didn't dare move in the breeze. She had a clipboard clutched in one hand, pen poised like a dagger, and eyes that drilled into me as if she had already judged every inch of my soul. Without a word, she shouldered forward, her perfume clashing against the smell of hay that drifted in from the barn. "You can't just walk in here and take over this property," she said, her voice high-pitched and cutting, like a nail dragged across glass. "This ranch falls under our HOA's authority, and you are already in violation." I stood there, dumbfounded, as she waved her clipboard in the air like it was a badge. She rattled off a list of infractions: weeds growing by the fence, paint peeling off the barn doors, a rusted tractor ruining the aesthetic of the neighborhood. My throat tightened when she jabbed her finger at the tall flagpole by the porch, the same pole where my grandfather's flag had flown since before I was born. "That," she said sharply, "has to come down. It's not an approved design." I gripped the door frame so hard the wood bit into my palm. "Ma'am," I told her through clenched teeth, "this land has been in my family since long before your little HOA ever existed. You don't get to dictate how I run my ranch." Her lips curled back in a smirk that sent a chill through me. "Don't you ma'am me," she snapped, stepping back onto the porch with her heels sinking into the dirt. "I'm the president of this association, and you'll find that around here what I say goes. If you won't follow the rules, I'll be forced to take further action. Believe me, I don't lose." Then she spun on her heel, storming off toward the paved road where her pristine SUV sat parked like a throne. Her departure left a sour stillness in the air, one that clung even after she was gone. I closed the door slowly, staring at the flag outside, the morning suddenly heavier than before. Inheriting this ranch was supposed to mean peace. After years of living in the city, buried in politics and smothered by endless traffic, I had dreamed of mornings like this, quiet, earthy, and unbothered. When Grandpa passed, I wanted to honor his legacy, to keep alive the land he had bled for. The barn creaked with history, the pastures rolled out like a memory of him, and even the rooster's crow felt like a reminder of everything he had fought to keep. But just beyond the tree line, the world had changed. Cookie-cutter houses lined up in rows like soldiers, manicured lawns and beige siding choking the wildness out of the land. And with them came the HOA, with its signs, its bylaws, and its army of self-appointed enforcers. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was the embodiment of everything my grandfather had hated. Control, intrusion, rules written by people who had never gotten dirt under their nails. And she wasn't alone. There was Tom, a wiry man with a permanent scowl and a little dog tucked under his arm like it was part of his body. He hovered around Karen like a shadow, eager to echo her every word. Then there was Linda, the kind who lived for whispers and gossip, her eyes darting constantly like she was storing secrets to trade later. Together they made a trio that thrived on intimidation, and somehow I had become their newest project. A couple of days later I found proof of just how far they'd go. A bright yellow slip had been taped right to the barn door, fluttering in the wind like a warning flag. "Violation notice," it read at the top in bold letters. Underneath was a list that made me laugh at first, until the absurdity sank deeper. "Unapproved fencing," it read. "Unregistered equipment. Noise complaint, rooster at dawn." My grandpa's rooster had been crowing since the 1970s, and suddenly it was a violation. I crumpled the paper in my fist, but the anger stayed long after the paper turned to ash in the fireplace. That evening, as I stacked firewood by the porch, Tom showed up, his little dog trembling against his chest. He leaned on the fence and sneered. "Word of advice," he said, his voice low and smug. "Karen doesn't lose. If she says you cut the weeds, you cut the weeds. Otherwise, things get ugly." I looked him straight in the eye, my blood simmering beneath the surface. "This land doesn't answer to your HOA," I said, my voice firm enough to make his smirk twitch. He chuckled, shaking his head slowly, like I was a fool who hadn't learned the rules of the game yet. "Everything around here does," he muttered before walking off, leaving behind only the sound of his dog yapping into the twilight. The sheriff's deputies stood there like they didn't know whose side to take, shifting uncomfortably as Karen rattled off her list of accusations. Her voice carried over the gravel road like a banshee, sharp enough to make the horses in the pasture stir. "This man is refusing to comply with our HOA rules," she shouted, waving papers in the air. "He's endangering the community with unmaintained fencing, harboring dangerous animals, and blaring music at all hours of the night." My jaw dropped. "Music?" I said, throwing my arms out. "I play Willie Nelson on the porch while the sun goes down. That's not noise, that's culture." The deputies exchanged looks, one scratching his neck awkwardly before finally shrugging. "Look, sir," one of them said, his voice low and apologetic. "These are civil issues, not criminal ones. We can't enforce HOA regulations. Maybe try to work it out with her. Keep the peace, you know." I almost laughed at the suggestion, but Karen's smirk kept me silent. She leaned forward like she had already won, her perfume choking the morning air. "Oh, we'll work it out," she said smoothly. "One fine at a time." Then she turned, heels clicking on the gravel, and marched back toward her SUV like she had delivered some royal decree. My fists clenched at my sides, but there wasn't a damn thing I could do in front of the deputies. All I could do was watch her go and feel the heat building in my chest. The storm came fast. Within a week, my mailbox was stuffed with letters, each one folded neat and sharp like a blade, bright white paper with bold black ink, a steady drumbeat of accusations. $250 for livestock, fencing too close to the property line, $100 for unsightly equipment, Grandpa's old tractor that hadn't moved in years, $75 for odor complaints, as if the smell of manure wasn't the heartbeat of a ranch. I stood in the kitchen, tossing them one after another into the fire. But the flames did nothing to ease the tightening knot in my gut. Each letter was a reminder that Karen was watching, recording and waiting for me to break. It wasn't just the fines. It was the whispers that came with them. Linda, the gossip queen, carried stories through the neighborhood like wildfire. Suddenly I was squatting on inherited land. Rumors spread that Grandpa had left behind debts, that the county was preparing to foreclose, that I'd be gone within months. I could feel the stares when I drove into town, people pausing their conversations as I walked past. Even the clerk at the feed store started giving me that pitying smile, the kind people save for a man who doesn't know his world is crumbling. Karen had turned my name into fuel for her campaign, and I was the villain in every version of the story she told. One evening, I caught her red-handed, strutting across my field with a tape measure like she was surveying land for sale. I dropped the bucket of feed I was carrying and stormed across the dirt. "Step off my property," I barked, my voice carrying across the pasture. She spun, caught in the act, the silver tape dangling from her manicured fingers. "I'm documenting violations," she said calmly, like she was entitled to be there. My blood surged hot. "You're trespassing," I snapped, fists trembling at my sides. Her eyes narrowed and her chin tilted up. "This whole ranch is in violation of our standards. If you don't like it, sell and move. It's really that simple." Her arrogance hung in the air, heavy and sour, and I felt the rage knot tight in my throat. "Lady," I said, stepping closer, "this ranch stood before your subdivision ever existed, and it'll stand long after your HOA is gone." For the first time, something flickered in her expression, a twitch in her smile that betrayed a crack in her confidence. But just as quickly as it came, it vanished. She scoffed, turned on her heel, and marched back across the pasture as if nothing had rattled her. My hands shook long after she left, the silence of the field pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. The nights grew longer after that. Trucks slowed as they passed the ranch, engines humming low, headlights sweeping across the barn windows. Whispers carried through the wind, voices that hushed when I stepped onto the porch. Even the sheriff stopped by more than once, asking casual questions that didn't feel casual at all. "Everything okay out here?" he'd ask, eyes scanning the property like he expected to see something wrong. I wanted to shout that nothing was okay, that I was drowning in a war I never asked for. Instead, I swallowed it down and nodded, telling him what he wanted to hear. But when the door shut and the silence returned, the weight pressed harder. One night, I sat by the fireplace staring at Grandpa's photograph, the flames flickering across his weathered face. His eyes looked tired but proud, his hands resting on that old tractor Karen wanted gone. He had fought droughts, floods, and debts to keep this place alive, and here I was letting a woman with a clipboard unravel it all. The shame burned deeper than the anger, curling in my chest like smoke. I reached for another log, feeding the fire as the rooster crowed faintly outside, a stubborn echo of the man who had raised me. That was when the thought hit me, sharp and sudden, a seed of suspicion I couldn't shake loose. The next morning, I drove into town with a stack of papers under my arm, determination pressing against my ribs. At the county office, the clerk flipped through folders with a bored expression until something caught her eye. Her brow furrowed as she pulled out an old, dusty file, sliding it across the counter toward me. "Mr. Hayes," she said carefully, "did you know this property isn't actually listed under HOA jurisdiction?" I froze, the words sinking into me like a blade. "What do you mean?" I asked. She turned the folder so I could see for myself. The dates and signatures older than my grandfather's tractor. "This land predates the HOA by almost a century," she explained. "Their covenants don't apply to you at all." I held onto that knowledge like a weapon, keeping it tucked away while Karen tightened the noose around herself. Every fine she mailed, every rumor she spread, every dramatic speech she gave at her HOA meetings. She didn't realize she was building the case against her. I let her believe she was winning, allowed her to puff up in front of her neighbors, strutting around with that smug smirk like she had finally broken me. Meanwhile, I was collecting everything: the false notices, the trespassing photos, the county clerk's documents. Each one felt like a stone added to the foundation of a wall I was preparing to crush her with. The waiting was agony, but I knew patience was the only way to end this war once and for all. The night of the meeting arrived, and the community center buzzed like a hornet's nest. Rows of plastic chairs filled the room, neighbors murmuring, some eager to see me humiliated, others just curious about the drama Karen had promised. She stood at the front, a gavel in hand, posture stiff and commanding, basking in the spotlight like a queen addressing her court. Tom sat near the front with his little dog curled in his lap, grinning like he already knew the verdict. Linda fluttered from row to row, whispering in ears, eyes darting back toward me with a satisfied gleam. I sat in the back, calm but coiled, waiting for my moment as Karen rapped the gavel against the table. "This man is a menace," she declared, her voice loud enough to rattle the windows. "He refuses to comply with even the most basic community standards. He flaunts his so-called heritage, ignores our warnings, and undermines the harmony we've worked so hard to build." The crowd murmured, nodding, a few muttering agreements under their breath. She slammed the gavel again. "Tonight, we vote on whether to pursue legal action, to remove him from our community once and for all." Her eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to challenge her authority. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I waited, letting her bask in her false confidence just a little longer. When I finally stood, the scraping of my chair echoed through the tense silence. Every head turned, whispers rippling as I walked slowly to the front, papers clutched in my hand. I looked directly at Karen, holding her gaze until the smirk on her face twitched. "You're right about one thing, Karen," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the room. "Heritage does exempt me." She frowned, confusion flickering across her face as I held up the county records. "This ranch was established in 1872. Your HOA was created in 1995, legally. Your covenants don't apply to my land. Not one of your fines, not one of your notices. Not a single threat you've thrown my way has any authority over me." Gasps swept through the crowd as I laid the documents on the table in front of her. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out, just a sputter of denial. That's impossible," she stammered. "We all agreed this property fell under our jurisdiction." I leaned forward, lowering my voice but sharpening each word so everyone could hear. "No, you declared it, you lied. You manipulated these people into thinking you had power over something you never controlled." The neighbors shifted uneasily, whispers rising again, phones coming out as people snapped photos of the papers. Karen's face reddened, her hand tightening on the gavel as if she could still hammer her authority back into place. But I wasn't finished. Slowly, I pulled out another set of papers, heavier, thicker, and far more devastating. I looked back at the crowd before turning my eyes on Karen once more. "And here's the part you don't know. I'm not just the owner of that ranch. I'm the governor of this state. That means you're harassment, you're trespassing, you're fraudulent fines. They're not just petty acts of control. They're violations with legal consequences. Real consequences. A hush fell over the room, so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. Tom shifted nervously in his seat, his grin vanishing, while Linda's eyes widened as she clutched her phone tighter. Karen's face drained of color as the weight of my words settled. Her gavel hand trembled, her perfect posture slumping as the realization hit her. You can't threaten us like that," she whispered, her voice losing its edge. I stepped closer, lowering the papers onto the table between us. "It's not a threat, Karen, it's a promise. You've trespassed on my land, slandered my name, and tried to weaponize authority you never had. If you file one more notice, if you step foot on my property again, I'll drag this entire board into court myself. And believe me, I won't lose." The room erupted in murmurs, half disbelief, half awe, the balance of power shifting before their eyes. Tom stood abruptly, muttering excuses as he shuffled toward the door, his little dog barking as if sensing the panic. Linda pretended to be busy on her phone, avoiding my gaze as she slunk back in her chair. The neighbors who had once whispered against me now avoided Karen, their confidence in her shattering like glass. She stood frozen at the front of the room, her authority slipping away faster than she could grasp it. Her glare locked on me with venom that promised this fight wasn't over, and as I turned toward the exit, the air buzzing with chaos and betrayal, I knew deep down that Karen wasn't the type to surrender quietly, no matter how cornered she felt. So tell me, do you think Karen's finally done? Or is she plotting her revenge as we speak? Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, or someone who tried to control what they didn't own? If you were in my boots, would you have played it the same way, or gone even harder? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if you enjoyed watching her squirm. And don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, this war is far from over.